Good evening. I will now call the September 26th, 2023 meeting of the Ben Lapine School Board of Directors to order. I'd like to introduce our participants this evening. To my immediate left, Vice Chair Marcus LeGrand, Director Amy Tatum, Director Keena Chadwick, Director Carrie McPherson Douglas, Director Cameron Fisher, and Director Shirley Olson. And to my immediate right, Superintendent Stephen Cook, Deputy Superintendent Laura Nordquist, and Board Clerk Janet Bojanowski. We also have Aaron Trimble and Hannah Westfall tonight for ASL interpretation, and a Spanish interpretation of the work session is being provided on the BLS School Board YouTube page. And finally, I am Melissa Barnes-Delakia, Chair for the Board of Directors. I will invite you now to join me in saying the pledge, standing, removing your hat and saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We'll now move to item 3, review of the agenda. Superintendent Cook, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Fellow board members, are there any changes you'd like to request for the agenda? Hearing no changes, I will move forward with the agenda as it stands. A note for our stakeholders, we do not take public comment during our work sessions. This is an opportunity for the board to dig in and engage deeper in an area of work. We do, however, take board comment at every one of our, public comment at every one of our public board meetings, regular meetings. We'll now move into our work session. And tonight we are joined by Scott Mabin, who is our Director of Communications, who will lead us through what we are calling Local Levy 101. So Scott, take it away.
Thank you, Chair Barnes-Delakia. Appreciate the time. And this is my first opportunity to, I was going to say stand before you, sit before you today and talk about something that I really thoroughly enjoy. This elections, this is the old reporter in me. So this is going to be a fun few months for us if we proceed down this road, but happy tonight to give you what we're really kind of calling a high-level general Levy 101 presentation. Before we begin, I just kind of wanted to say a few words about kind of some background about how we got here tonight. At your June 20th board meeting, Chair Barnes-Delakia, in her chair report that evening, encouraged the district to actively investigate the possibility of having a local option levy for the school district, and then followed that up at your July 11th board meeting, where you voted that evening to authorize the district to investigate the options of a local option levy. So here we are tonight with the first of what will be several presentations through the fall. We will present to you about what the local option levy is and what that might look like for Ben Lapine schools as you consider possibly moving forward sometime in the near future with this.
Scott, would you mind if I interject just for a second?
Yeah.
Scott's kind of framed this, but I just want to bring attention to the fact that this actually gets grounded even in conversations that we were having all the way last spring, in which when we were tasking the task force with kind of consolidating what our biggest issues were and operationalizing systems to help resolve those. What we found was that there are systems that are incomplete, or if we were going to fully implement them, potentially would have to have additional resources. And that was, I think we've had, looking out in the audience, maybe 6 or 7 task force meetings, and nobody that's on the task force is looking up right now. 6 or 7, I think, task force meetings. Does that sound right? I think that's correct. And several of the recommendations of the task force include things that would need a solution that would need to incorporate more resources. And so Scott and I've talked a lot about how best to start to present this information. And so what we've decided, and he's kind of expressed that direction, is that this is going to be a trilogy, if you will, of how a levy conversation might come to bear for the district and what those next steps might be. And today is kind of an introduction to Levy 101 and a little bit of background, and we'd like to follow that up again in a couple of months with more specific as it relates to the Ben Lapine schools and what those kinds of questions, and then coming back probably around the time frame of January or so, and really talking with you all about how those expectations of what we hope to operationalize in the next 3 to 5, maybe even 7 years could be laid in front of you as parts of that align to the goals that this board has established for the vision for this community and this district, and put all of those pieces together so that it has some coherence in what we would be aligning the reasons and rationale for why we would consider asking our community to increase their own taxes to support the work of the district. And so just wanted to take that opportunity to kind of interject that so that we're starting to build this kind of understanding of how that we're going to attack this a little more comprehensively. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cook. And please, I'd invite you to interrupt me with questions, engage Dr. Cook and myself tonight through the presentation. There might be some areas where we feel like we're maybe getting into what that 201 or 301 presentation might be. So if we get into some of those finer points, we might just want to take some notes and get back to you. How's that? Thank you. So like I said, tonight really is about an overview of what is a local option levy and how it works. But we also will take a little time to dive into what school districts in Oregon currently are using the local option levy. We'll take a look at a sample timeline for an election for placing a potential local option ballot measure before voters, and what that timeline looks like. Very similar really to a bond levy request in terms of the timing. And also we will talk a little bit about what the district's role is in sharing information with the community and who may actually advocate on behalf of a levy proposal. And then as Dr. Cook outlined, we will be taking a look later this fall at what is currently already collected in Deschutes County on behalf of Ben Lapine School District in terms of property taxes. We'll take a look at potential local option levy rates or amounts and what that might generate for the district. Also looking at identifying what priorities you see for investing those potential local option levy dollars into district operations. That would potentially lead us into a conversation with you about setting a levy rate or a fixed dollar amount and how that works. Deciding which election might be appropriate for a potential levy request in our community, and then coupled with that, what a public engagement process would look like. So what is a local option levy? And some in our community may be familiar with it with other taxing districts. I think the city had one earlier this year with fire services. Simply put, it's a property tax which voters may be asked to approve at a local level to provide additional funding for operations, and in this case, school district operations. And this would be in addition to our permanent rate levy that property owners are familiar with seeing on their tax statements for, it's labeled School District 1 on the statement. The permanent rate, along with state, and some federal funding for education provides the revenue that we use for our district operations. The local option levy is also unrelated, or I want to distinguish it from any of the school construction bonds that property owners might see, do see on their tax statement, those that were previously approved over the years by voters in our district. So a school district may propose a local option levy either as a rate-based levy, for example, $1.25 per $1,000 of assessed value, or as a fixed dollar amount, $8 million a year or something like that. Just wanted to pause there and say that one advantage of a local option tax that is put in front of voters in the form of a rate per $1,000 of assessed value is that the revenue from that levy can increase over time if the value of property in the district also increases at the same time. Conversely, revenue could also decline if the total value in the district were to decrease. An advantage of setting your levy request as a fixed dollar amount is that that amount is fixed, and the county assessor will then adjust the tax rate imposed as necessary to raise that fixed amount. So really there are two options or two approaches to that. Finally, I just want to point out that voters may approve a local option levy for anywhere from 1 to 5 years. From what I have seen in my research, 5 years is the typical request for either establishing a new local option levy or for a renewal. So just continuing with this overview, since the passage of Measure 5 way back in 1990, we all know that school districts in Oregon have experienced financial strain. And recognizing this, the legislature in 1999 granted school districts, the ability to ask local voters to levy an additional amount of tax on themselves, and that's what is referred to as the local option. And again, it is available to support district operations, and that can include specific programs or services or staffing costs as determined by the board. Typically, districts are looking to the local option to fund ongoing operational costs rather than capital costs like construction projects. When school districts have a need for a need to fund new schools, remodels, expansions, major equipment upgrades, things like that, those are the capital needs that are generally funded through a construction bond. And that is what we are doing now in our district with the 2022 bond measure that voters here approved for a host of projects, notably the rebuild of Bend Senior High School, but a lot of other important projects that touch on safety and a lot else. And we'll probably talk a little bit as we go on through this process to continue to distinguish between a local option levy and a bond. One way that and I can't claim ownership or authorship of this, but one way that I like to distinguish between these two funding mechanisms is bonds are for building, levies are for learning. I just think it's easy for us and the public to remember that. Any questions so far? All right. Next, I want to talk a little bit about how the local option levy actually works. So the maximum amount that a district may raise through the local option levy is actually limited in statute, and that is to maintain some degree of funding equalization among all the school districts in the state. And we'll probably get into some of those specifics, I would imagine maybe at our next presentation. Serial levies, and that's in a term that you'll hear come up again. That simply means those local option levies that extend anywhere from 2 to 5 years, so beyond just the 1 year of assessment. Serial levies must be the same each year, whether it is that fixed amount or it's the tax rate that was proposed. It remains the same throughout the life of the levy. If a district were to want to change that rate or that amount, they would have to do that through a renewal, basically a voter approval for that change. The board resolution that will authorize a local option levy on the ballot must clearly state the purpose of the tax and the total cost. Sorry about this. I do not want to update my computer right now. Anyway, the purpose and the total cost must be expressed clearly in the ballot language. The cost is what the district would anticipate that levy would generate, and also needs to express how many years, again, between 1 and 5 years. And in one of our upcoming presentations this fall, we will show you sample ballot language that includes all those pieces: the ballot caption, the question, the summary, and then the explanatory statement. Oregon law requires that the ballot title provides, and I'm going to quote here from the statute, a reasonably detailed, simple, and understandable description of the use of these proceeds. So next, I want to talk just a bit about how we're seeing districts around the state actually using the local option levy, or those that have one in place. It is not in widespread use, I would say, among school districts, but half of the 10 largest districts in Oregon currently have one. 7 of the 20 largest districts are using the local option levy to supplement their funding. There are, I'm realizing the deeper I dive into this, and I haven't yet found that anyone's done a great job of compiling details on all 197 school districts that have or do not have a local option levy. So the more I'm looking, the more I'm finding some of these smaller rural districts like Lorain, Applegate, Crow district near Eugene, they have one. But we will, I'll show you a picture of a lot of the larger districts, those around our size, somewhat smaller, somewhat larger, that do have it in place. Going back about 4 years with our elections, we have seen 14 local option levies approved by voters. That includes a renewal for the Lake Oswego School District just this past May. And then just 2 districts, Park Rose and Pendleton, in that 4-year time frame where voters did not approve those levies. So here now is a look at 14 districts with a levy in place today. And by the way, this slide and the previous slide are have been updated since the packet was released last week. As we discovered, we left a few off this list. The first column is, of course, the name of the district, and then you'll see the tax rate next. That's, again, the rate per thousand. Again, that could have been either what the board in that district decided was the appropriate rate, or it could have been the rate that the assessor selected based on the fixed dollar amount that the district sought. And then the election date follows, and then the margin of approval. And quite a few of those passed, I would say, fairly handily when you get up in those 70%. Portland with the largest rate that I have found so far, had also the largest approval at 77%. The average rate of all of these on this slide is $1.36 per thousand.
Scott,
Yeah.
how many of those districts listed did a fixed rate?
I don't know that yet
Oh,
because
okay.
it's interesting. I'd have to go back and dig into that a little deeper because I just see the rate. Either way they get there, there's going to be a rate in the ballot language.
Yeah,
But whether they started with the rate or they started with a fixed amount.
with
and
a
then
fixed amount and then the assessor
the
determines
assessor
the rate.
determined
Okay,
a rate ends up in the
Okay.
ballot.
next time.
About time, yep. So I don't know if all these are on here, but talking about the 10 largest districts, I'll just note Portland, Beaverton, North Clackamas, Eugene, and Tigard, Tualatin all have levies in place. And the other 5 in the top 10 do not. That would be Salem Kaiser, Hillsborough, Medford, Gresham Barlow, and Van Lapine. You may be wondering if this school district has ever had the local option levy in place, and the answer to that is no. But there was an attempt nearly 20 years ago to establish the local option levy. It was proposed twice in 2004. The first time was in the spring, in May, and you can see here that 56% of voters said no. And then the district came back later that same year in November, and the no votes actually increased to 63%. And that was the last time the school board for Ben Lapine Schools referred a local option levy to the ballot in our district. I've done a little preliminary research. It's a little hard sometimes to find the details for something that long ago, but some of the news coverage at the time cited a desire to keep schools open for longer in the school year. So I guess to add some instructional days, and then to also decrease class size. And that is, I would say, a theme that we continue to see with a lot of the school districts around the state that are renewing their local option levy. Class size often comes up as a priority.
Scott, quick question. Was your take also on, when I was looking at that news coverage, do you agree that there was also a lot of I felt like there was a lot of confusion in the population around what is a bond and what is a levy, and that was one of the things I also saw
Yeah.
contributing to that.
Yeah, I agree. And some of the news coverage that, some of the analysis in the news coverage that followed the second levy defeat that year also talked about just some trust issues, I think, in the community around what this is for and how the district had been just managing its resources. And so, but really that's anecdotal. And I don't know if the district conducted any, public opinion research following that. I think it felt like they just said, well, we got our answer, let's move on. So
One of the, just anecdotally from my early years on the board, hearing the board speak about the big audit that we decided to fund to make sure that we were being really transparent with the community about how we were spending bond money came out of some of that lack of trust around this. So my recollection is that the board felt like one thing they could do was provide a really stringent and transparent audit process essentially for the public to understand how we were doing managing our bonds, which is, different but similar. And just a reminder for the board and public that the audit firm that completed that just said that our district did a phenomenal job of stewarding the public funds and really found almost nothing, if anything, any concerns about how our district was a steward of public money around bonds, so.
Thank you. Now I'd like to talk a little bit about the options, the election date options that school districts and really any special taxing district has for a local option levy. There are 4 dates a year, and the May and November dates have no turnout requirement associated with them. So a simple majority means a levy proposal would prevail either in May or November. The other 2 election dates are March and September, and those are the ones that have the double majority requirement. So not only would you need 50% plus 1 to pass your measure, but you would also need the total turnout of voters, and that would be registered voter turnout to exceed 50%. I am not seeing school districts or really any districts attempting to kind of breach or, deal with that double majority challenge. It's just, you're looking at voter turnouts of maybe 15-20% sometimes in those election dates. Even the May 2020 presidential primary in Deschutes County only had 44% voter turnout. So, but again, that's not a consideration if you refer something to the ballot for either the May or the November dates.
And this next May would be a presidential primary, so we would expect
Right.
that 40-ish turnout.
Yes, probably. I didn't, I only looked back at that date knowing that we were coming up on a presidential primary or presidential election year. I did not look at November. November might actually surpass the 50% mark, but that'd be interesting to take a look at. It does. It's good.
Who determines when it would go on a ballot?
You would, the board would. This is the board's call, the board's decision. So again, all 4 of these election dates are available to you. But likely our recommendation would be to look either at the May or the November elections.
And part of the work that we've tasked them to do is to come with a recommendation on that as well.
In addition, to, of course, to the presidential primary in May, there's a lot of down ballot races that will be of high interest. Senate, Congress, some statewide races, a lot of court races, legislative races. So it's going to be at a high profile and busy election date. So here we just are going to take a look at a sample timeline. And this is roughly an 80-day process from when when the district would first file the text of the referral or the ballot measure to the county. And so we're looking at an election date of March 21st, 2024 here. But again, this roughly 80-day process would apply to any of those 4 election dates. So again, kicking off March 1st, that is the deadline to file the title and the text of a local option levy ballot measure with the county elections office. And that kicks off a 7-day challenge period. So residents or members of the community have an opportunity at that time to read and consider what has been referred to the ballot. And there's that opportunity to challenge it. I believe that goes through district court. And if there is a court challenge, this ensures that the school district would have enough time to resolve that with revised language and still make the deadline for the March 21st ballot.
Scott, you just want to clarify the May 21st ballot, not March.
Oh, did I say March? Sorry. I'm looking at a lot of different dates here. March 25th is when arguments for or against the measure would be due again to the county for the voters, for publication in the voters pamphlet. May 1st would be the first date that ballots are mailed to voters. And then 20 days later is election day. Now I've simplified this. There's probably 25 different dates that the elections office actually publishes related to any given election. But I just wanted to highlight some of those key deadlines so you get an idea of what that timeline looks like, but also why we're talking about, okay, if March 1st is our deadline, what are we doing in February? What are we doing in January? So forth. I'm actually going to back up because there's one other thing I wanted to add here. And again, I think we'll get into more detail on this in one of our future presentations. But the first tax year in which a tax can be imposed may also influence your deliberation and your decision about which election date to select, the tax year being July 1st through June 30th. So taxes that would be approved or that are approved in, say, the November, March, or May elections can first be imposed the following tax year. So, for example, a local option tax that is approved by voters in May of 2024 can first be imposed in the tax year beginning July 1st, 2024. The district then would begin receiving distributions of that revenue in November of 2024. And then finally, a tax that would be approved in November of 2024 can first be imposed in the tax year beginning July 1st of 2025, and then distributions would begin the following November of 2025. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up by talking just a little bit about the difference between information and advocacy and whose roles those are important for. The district, and what I mean by the district is district administration and the institution of Ben Lapine Schools itself may provide factual information about the measure and inform voters what the results would be if it were to pass or if it were to fail at the election. And all of the information that the district in its formal role provides to the community must be impartial and avoid any implication that it's advocating on behalf of a levy. School board members, however, as elected volunteers and not school employees, school district employees, you may engage in advocacy as long as no public funds are used in the process of your advocacy. And that includes your remarks here. I mean, you are free to, of course, comment on and even vote on a resolution in support of a levy in your role and in your capacity during these meetings. I stated that clearly. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, district employees are in a little bit of a different situation. So employees may engage in advocacy activities as well. It must be outside of their work hours and absolutely cannot use any public resources. For example, district email, district laptops, copy machines, district phones, that kind of thing. And finally, the school district also would not be able to share information on, say, a PAC, a political action committee, that perhaps was working in the community to support the levy, we should avoid sharing that information through our official communication channels, like publishing that on our website. A question came up a few days ago about what may employees display on themselves, or say on their vehicle, for example, a button, a bumper sticker in the workplace. The statute on that says public employees may wear political buttons or clothing at work so long as it does not violate their employer's policy. And a public employer may not request or require that public employees wear political clothing or buttons or other accessories, of course. And then as far as campaign signs, generally public employees may have political stickers on their personal property or display political signs in their work area, again, as long as they're doing that on their own time, like they're putting it together and displaying it during their personal time. And then, again, it's not violating either policy or any other applicable statute.
What about district employees advocating on social media, as long as it's outside of
If it's
work
their-
time and personal?
Correct, yeah, if it's their personal social media. Of course, we have a lot of social media pages that are associated with schools, and they just need to be very careful where they're posting their advocacy, where they're sharing it. So this is a repeat of a slide from earlier in the presentation. But again, over the next few meetings, we will talk about the why. What are you potentially looking to fund or support? The what, is this a fixed rate levy? Is it a fixed amount levy? Just the mechanics of that, the when, looking at the election dates, and I think the how, and that really gets back to the community engagement and how we share information with our community throughout the process. Yeah.
I have a quick question. I know we're not getting into anything specific to Ben Lapine today, but just to sort of right-size my own expectations and the public's expectations, either using like that maximum amount or the average amount for the size of our district. I think we have about a $300 million budget. Are we talking, like, would this raise $1 million or $20 million or $100 million? Like, can you give us any sense of what a levy would mean for our district in very vague terms, knowing that we haven't looked at any specifics?
So Brad Henry, our operations director, is working on that, and I think he's going to bring some examples of rates at different levels and what that would potentially generate back to you for one of these next 2 meetings, I would say. So we'll get back to you on that. Yeah.
I can tell you that generally a good round number, $1 per thousand, would generate about $22 million. And general budget is in the, 220 range, I think? 220 million for a general fund budget. So maybe, I mean, Brad's on vacation, so I can say this, and who's going to check me? He is, probably. Roughly, a dollar per thousand is roughly 10%, potentially, so.
Scott, when we look at other districts who are, in the big districts who have a local option levy, can you speak to what they are generating those funds for? How are they using those funds?
Yeah, thank you. I expected the question, and I did a little research and dug up a few examples that I can walk. I don't have a slide for this, but if you'll indulge me, I can just read from a few sample districts. Lake Oswego, which, by the way, you may have noticed on my earlier slide, was represented twice. They went, even though they had a 5-year levy, they went for a renewal after 4 years. I think they were just hedging their bets and giving themselves plenty of runway for having to return if that wasn't successful. So the Lake Oswego district talked about their priorities were protecting class sizes, educator positions, instructional days, and elective programming. For that district, their local option levy represents about 15% of their total annual operating budget and funds the equivalent of 1/3 of all teaching positions in the district. Sisters School District has had a local option levy since 2000, so they've had at least 4 renewals, I think, maybe 5 renewals. In their communications, they talk about classroom impact, such as lower class sizes, maintaining current programming and staffing, continuing to fund some staff salaries for the next 5 years of that. This again was when they went out for their most recent renewal. In that district, the levy represents about 10% of their annual operating budget. Hood River, which has had a local option levy since 2004, their priorities were keeping class sizes low, maintaining popular electives like engineering, robotics, agriculture, dual language, PE, supporting extracurricular activities, athletics, music, theater, arts, supporting CTE, Career Technical Education programming in the district, and AP courses, and again, funding in their district 16 teaching positions and some staff, some additional support staff. That's about 10% of their budget from the levy. And the last one is, I picked this one because most of these are renewals, and I think it's potentially, I don't want to say easier, but when you're engaging with your community about something they're already seeing and they're familiar with, I just think it's a different conversation. So I found one that is new from earlier this year, from May, Sherwood School District. And their approach was to talk about their budget shortfall, which they expressed to be about $7 million for the current school year. And they talked about that shortfall putting them in a position where they were going to be unable to maintain their current level of programs and services. So they kind of did this in reverse, where they talked about what that budget reduction would mean to families and students in the district. It would be the equivalent, they said, of eliminating 50 teaching and staff positions and reducing the school year by 10 days. So their levy raised $6.5 million annually to retain teachers, retain staff, maintain existing class sizes, and they were very explicit what those ratios were in their ballot language, maintain extracurricular programs in the arts and athletics, and finally support course offerings again in CTE and AP.
I just want to jump in as well. Scott referenced the renewal of the local levies. They tend to, they always tend to be successful. Beaverton during the recession lost a local opera renewal, and then when they went back again, they got it. One of the reasons, just as with us, when we have bonds that don't raise the tax rate, that you know, most of those levies, that it's going to keep consistent. And then you have, I mean, all of them involve class sizes and staffing. And so when you talk about cutting 10% of your staff, that's a pretty powerful message for the community. So anyway, I just thought that's important information.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the same thing, and then you addressed it, but just the next time you come back, it would be great if the examples and recommendations, as much as possible, were about the first time, because it's so much harder to talk about losing something as opposed to imagining something that doesn't yet exist. So it'd be great to really understand how folks have done it the first time around.
Absolutely, thank you.
Thank you.
Scott, this has been really helpful, and I'm curious about Park Rose and Pendleton, and maybe for next time, or what is it, 201 or 301, next couple meetings. Curious about those two and what the margins were, and also what were some of the barriers. And then, I mean, this is the magic questions, what's the sweet spot, right? So I think of Sisters at 75 cents, and then I think of some of those others at 175. Can there be more, I don't know, sleuthing for, you know, meeting number 3 on how districts figured that out? And I don't know, maybe there's no magical solution, or, but it'd be interesting to know how do you find that? Yeah.
The conversation that leads to setting the rate or the amount.
Yeah, just, I mean, it sounds so challenging, but there's so many other different things going on, and I think of the presidential, you know, primary, and all these other influences, and then we just had the bond, and other concerns. How do you, you know, balance all those things? And I know there's maybe just hearing a little more on how you think about that, or others recommend us, we think about that.
Yes, absolutely, thank you.
Scott, one of the things, one of the slides mentioned that there is a maximum. Is that determined by the legislature, by the state? Can you speak to that?
Certainly, it is stated or expressed in statute. I'm hoping Brad will dive into this a little further, because it gets into that tricky topic of compression, which he understands much better than I do. But there are certain limits in the amount that you may raise through a local option levy. And some of it it gets into school distribution, formula revenue. There's a limit per weighted student. That's $2,000 per weighted student, but it can increase by up to 3% a year. So it gets fairly technical fairly quickly, and I think what we'd like to do is really spend some time ciphering all that and putting it into the next presentation, and let Brad take that.
Okay, and the other thing that was really helpful was what percent some of these local levies were of the general budget. You know, 10%, 20%, whatever. So I didn't know if that had something to do with the maximum. Is it figured on your current size and budget, or what? So that's my question. I understand it's probably very much much more complex than I could ever understand. But the idea of that there is a maximum, and that these districts all had to make some determination about how much they thought they could get, and is that reasonably connected to what they could get? And, you know, so we can, you know, if a third of the staff, that's a huge amount. That's going to be a huge amount of a individual district budget. But so it's the percentage of the levy compared to the operating budget, and then what's the gap between that and a potential maximum that the state would require or would set. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. Director
And
Rosanna.
Director Olson, I have the percent of general fund and the percent of salaries and benefits also, just my back of the envelope calculations, but we'll
Good.
have Brad
Okay.
do that more fully. And I do believe in terms of the caps, there are two different types of caps or two different ways that it can cap. And one is related to the funding formula for the schools and the other is related to the taxes that are on properties already. And so we'll have Brad explain all of that because it's super complicated.
And I did request that we go back and visit some of the data that you presented in June, because that also gives us a starting point of talking about not just amounts, but needs.
Yes, and I will say, while this research shows that, half of the top 10 districts, largest districts have one and half don't, every district that has a double digit, whose cost of living is in the double digits over Oregon's, has one of those top 10 districts. And so it's definitely something we should be looking at as well.
And I anticipate that I'll be going back through those slides that you presented and that information. It was very important, I think, to give us a leveling picture of what's even reasonable.
Here's one more way to look at it. I referenced this earlier. I didn't have this slide available before the packet was published, but these are the 20 largest districts by enrollment. And it's a little hard to see, but you can see the 7 that have a levy in place.
Two other quick questions. One, I know you're in constant communication with the city and parks and other folks, and when they're thinking about going out for levies or bonds. So just if we could get an update at one of these next meetings about what other folks are thinking as far as timing. And then just around public engagement, I don't know how far into the details you've gotten, but just curious if we're thinking about putting out our sort of proposal and seeing what the public thinks about it, or if we're thinking about going to the public and really just saying, like, what do you think we need to be spending more money on, kind of a little more open-ended in the beginning. I'd love to see a little bit of both personally, but just didn't know if you already had an idea of kind of what that public engagement would look like.
Yeah, so we're already in the process of some of this. And, one thing I want to qualify is we haven't started the engagement regarding the dollars and what the dollars would be used for, but we have started the engagement around what is it that we're trying to accomplish. And when we come, probably next time, we're going to talk about a lot of things that we could do and what those opportunities look like. But what we want to bring this back to, and if you will, in like the Levy 301 conversation, is here are the things that we've identified through lots of conversations with internal and external stakeholders about the needs of the district, and making those alignments. I promise you, and as all of the people that are in this room that have done some of this work already are my witnesses and participants in these conversations, we have the ability to spend money on real things that could impact students in our district far beyond what we could elevate and gain from a community levy. And so starting to build that list of what we believe are those needs in our near future, and then building a plan for how that could be sustained over time. That is the end game. And we come back, and Levy 301 is not just what we could do and what we think is possible, but how it aligns with our goals. And so those two conversations, one of those is deeply underway, and we were already codifying and building that list of expectations from our community as the task force has presented to us. They've said, these are priorities we have right now. Help us find solutions, and those priorities take more resources. And so that list, just like the sites and facilities kind of process, winds up generating a list that is this long, and then we prioritize it back to the things that we feel like are going to be the most impactful. That's our intent through this process, and bringing you all along for this conversation so that the next one we would have We could talk more about our own local decision-making and how those dollars could be generated, what people in our community would potentially be interested in spending money on, and what they're not interested in spending money on, and then working our way towards finding a sweet spot of a recommendation that is, these are the list of things we wish to accomplish, these are the resources we're going to need to make that happen, and bringing that to our voters and saying, we think this is the right amount and the right match for this community.
And Steve mentioned the task force, and I think it's important that we think about, we don't plan to start from scratch. So there are people we want to circle back with, but if you all remember last year when we went through the integrated planning process, we went through a very large engagement process, working with external facilitators to talk to students and family members and community members. We wanted, we looked at our task force information, some other opportunities to gather more information from staff and maybe some groups, but it's not like we need to start, sorry, oh, it was empty, thank goodness, that we need to start from scratch. We'll build on a lot of work that's happened over the last year or so in terms of what are the needs that we need to focus on.
And I
Not
just
to
want to
mention
add
like Youth
one
Truth
thing.
Survey results.
Youth
and all,
Truth
you know,
Survey
so,
results.
yeah.
We have multiple years of data now that they're telling us explicitly what we need to work on.
And our Student Advisory Committee.
In the Division 22 report, will that be discussed, that the work that the community outreach, or when will we hear?
For the integrated planning process?
For the integrated
So
plan
we shared that
process.
last year,
We
Melissa.
did.
Yeah, when we did, but I can make the whole report available to you. We could include that for. Yeah,
Yeah,
because it was condensed down and presenting to the board to a few slides, but we have that, absolutely the whole report. So I'll talk to Janet, maybe send it out to all
I
the
feel like
board.
I think it's so important, the work that we did, that you led, Dr. Nordquist, 5 years ago, and then again last year with our Excellence and Equity Plan, and this idea that we do have a strategic planning process. We do a lot of community engagement around what our priorities are. And so being able to just, I think, make that transparent as well in this process of what we've heard from these different Youth Truth and the integrated plan process. All right.
Thank you.
Do we graduate as freshmen? Can we go on to 201 now?
We'll see.
Maybe. Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. I am really looking forward to continuing this process. I am going to now move us on to item number 5 for my fellow board members. As we were discussing our board meetings, which are starting to go really long, our regular ones, the second Tuesday, we decided one thing that we're going to do is Superintendent and Cook and I are going to move our reports to the end of the meeting. And we're going to add a board chair report at the end of the workshops as well. So if there are things that we need to talk about, because this is the only place we can talk and not have a serial meeting, then we can. And hopefully that means in the other meeting, that conversation will be shorter. So that's the goal here. And I did want to share just 2 things that I know have come, well, one thing that's come up in our board emails that we've all received information about, and then a second piece that's more of an appreciation. But the first one is just bias incidents, and we did receive information or requests for information from different community members, and it's a great opportunity for us to highlight the work that our team has done in terms of the bias incident. And so I really want to encourage our community members. If you are concerned about something that you hear has happened in our schools, please let us know. On the very front, the splash page, our homepage of the district website, at the very bottom, it says bias incident reporting and equity information. And so just click on that link, And please fill out the form. It's quick, relatively painless, but that helps us know. Chances are, a lot of times, things build and people get concerned, and so that concern builds and a lot of people are talking, and it's probably already being investigated. But if you have a concern, use that bias incident form and don't assume it's already been taken care of, because that's the flip side. We want to encourage people to be upstanders, not bystanders. So please do use that, and anyone can complete. You don't have to be the student or a parent of a student. Second, I just wanted to name that our district takes these incidents and is actively investigating them. One of the difficult things is that federal law, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, protects these types of situations. So you're not going to hear the principal or the assistant principal out making announcements and advisory about how they handle the situation. That's protected. And different families react differently. And so some families want privacy. Some people don't. They're like, no, I want this to be a learning experience for the whole school. But that's the family's right to make, as much as we might want it to be a learning experience for the whole school. So I want to just name that the district actively investigates, but because of FERPA and families' own desires, you may feel like, well, whatever happened with that? But circling back to the public isn't actually, that's something that's protected. It gets into pretty dicey areas around students and families and their privacy. And then last, I want to say, we are very happy with our community's engagement with the bias incident reporting, and we will probably continue to see an uptick of bias incidents reported this year, even though we're in a parallel process trying to refine our response to these. And we're okay with that increasing if it means not that there's more incidents, but there's more upstanders that are saying this isn't okay, and they're reporting it. And so I hope that the community understands that we expect the reporting to go up, but that we also hope that it will go down eventually once we continue to work on these systems and protect our kids. The second thing I wanted to report on was just on early literacy. As we know, the parameters for funding at the state level are going to be announced next week. I'm super excited that it is supplemental to the student investment dollars and not supplanting those. I wanted to mention that I was able to be on the Stand for Children call. I don't know if any of you were, that went over all of the legislation, but we'll be able to hear about that at our next board meeting in terms of the work that our district is doing in early literacy. So I'm looking forward to that, but I want to, I think we are. Work session, sorry, not board meeting, work session. The people making this, like, whoa, Melissa, wait. But I do want to make a couple of appreciations on that front. I want to appreciate Representative Kropf, who was one of the co-sponsors of that bill. I want to appreciate Sharon Belushi, who is a parent in our district who advocated relentlessly for us to do better in early reading, especially for dyslexic children. And I want to appreciate a colleague of mine, Kareem Weaver, who is in there's a great Time article, but is heavily featured in that, who leads work around reading being a fundamental civil right for children. And then finally, Julie Walker for doing the actual work around curriculum. But I'm very excited. It makes me feel really good when I'm on calls with Stand for Children around early literacy, and everyone else is asking questions about what they might be able to do. And we're trying to figure out how we can capture the funding, because we're already doing it, a lot of that work, and prioritizing it. So I think our district is really positioned well, and thank the leadership for that. I will now open to board comments, and we will start with Director Olson.
Nothing at this time.
Nothing for me.
I just wanted to thank the superintendent and cabinet for all the follow-up emails we got following the last board meeting with additional data and requests we had made. I really appreciate it.
I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Clark at Ben Tech Academy. Was able to visit with her and yeah, to see how she's getting more familiar with Ben. Although she did go to middle school here, so that was cool to hear. Yeah, that's it.
No comment.
Good at this time.
And I already spoke. So we will move on. Our next regular school board business meeting is scheduled for October 10th, 2023, and it will be held at Lapine High School. So please join us there. It's going to be a fabulous meeting. We're really excited. And with that said, this meeting is adjourned.